Toby was anxious. First dates always made him anxious. This one, though, was set up via a very select dating website recommended by a vague friend he'd known for what felt like centuries. He trusted them. This was going to work. Although perhaps the anxiety was more to do with the cold, dark, overcast sky and the rain running down his neck while waiting outside in the park for the date. Perhaps this wasn't a great move to be here. He should have said meet at the restaurant, but no, she wanted to meet outside first. And, you know, he was happy to do that. The park was empty of people. It was getting late. The weather was picking up and the wind was blowing the bushes around, and they were dark, swaying as if a rampaging army of cats were having out with each other in there. It was a bit alarming and distracting. But finally he saw her, or rather he heard her feet first, her steps approaching. Then he saw her. Elizabeth, Beth, as he came to know via their conversations online. She was wrapped in a dark coat, her hands tucked into her pockets, collar turned up, and a beanie hat on top. But once she got close enough, he could make out her face. He gasped at such beauty, better than the photo on her profile. On such a night like this, he also wondered how her makeup was so perfect. She held out her slender arms and they embraced. It was heaven. Arm in arm, they locked and left the park to go to the restaurant over the road. On entering, the coats were taken by a waiter who seemed to be quite eager to get them seated, but he forgot himself completely and let out a whistle, which he instantly felt embarrassed about. She was stunning. Off-the-shoulder red dress, long hair, and a thin red little scarf around her neck, which made her look like a really classy 1940s. It was really, it was really good. He realized, though, he was looking at her for too long, and the waiter was tapping his foot, eager with impatience. He blurts out to try and cover his embarrassment, only to make things worse when he says, "You look so good enough to eat." His face really felt burning, and he could have just curled up into a little ball at that point. But she diffused with a lovely smile and touch of his arm. He relaxed enough and then went bright red again when she leaned in and said, "All in good time." He was thrown, but she led him away while he tried to recover himself, following the waiter to their table. Well, the hours flew by as if in a dream. They talked, ate, drank, and talked loads more all night until they were the last in the restaurant. The food and company was perfection, and he felt she seemed to have enjoyed herself too. It was such a great idea coming to this place. It's his favorite place. They get his rare steak exactly to his taste, as well as every other dish. It was perfect. Unfortunately, even perfect things have to come to an end. And back out into the cold, separate taxis for both of them. He wasn't going to push his luck on the first date. But they had promised to go on a second. And a couple of days of anxiety waiting for the call. Well, a couple of weeks of regular dates, including a couple of kisses, which were very nice. He felt really good. Is this too early to be calling it love? Perhaps. But to be honest, they were getting on so well. It was like they had known each other all their lives. Nothing he could think of was annoying about her, and he hoped it was mutual. Well, actually, there was one thing, that tiny little one thing that he noticed, and it was starting to not get to him, but it was just a little thing. Every time they were together, whatever she wore, and believe me, it was perfect, whatever she wore, she always had that small scarf around her neck. It was nothing really, and it always suited whatever she was wearing, and it suited her. Nothing really to pick holes in. So he thought, well, perhaps it'll change eventually. Well, this particular date he was now waiting for. His nerves were particularly raised once again. The relationship had been moving along, and after the previous night's snogging session at the back of the cinema like a teenager, which they were definitely not anymore, they seemed to have naturally become more comfortable with one another. And he felt that their mutual feeling of desire was driving them a little bit further than he was expecting at this stage. He hadn't felt so nervous in years, but she was very, very special. But tonight's date would be the acid test, because Beth had decided she wanted to cook at home for him. He wasn't sure if that was a signal, but he would just go with the flow, not be too eager, and see how the night goes out. Well, he stood on the doorstep, stomach churning with anxiety, as yet another dark night, but punctuated with brief glimpses of moonlight this time, and no rain, which he was very grateful for, as he knocked on the door. She answered, perfection again. He was a little bit taken aback because they were staying in right. She was dressed immaculately as if they were going out as usual. And again, a scarf, a small blue one this time, matched her blue slinky dress, and his blood boiled. He was telling himself to calm down, and actually talk would be a good move by now, though her smile made it clear she knew exactly what he was thinking. Dinner was nice and light, and he admired the token thought because they both knew what tonight was really about, he had hoped. Afterwards, they slumped down on the sofa with drinks. To his surprise, Beth suggested they watch a scary movie while their dinner goes down. Not his kind of thing, but he soon understood the real reason. They could snuggle up nice and tight and hold on to each other during the scary bits. Again, he admired her planning. That was a fantastic idea. Well, they certainly clung to one another, hands going places. His heart thumping in his chest, louder than it ever done before. His blood burning through his body. He really yearned for a lot more. Eventually, his lips touched her shoulder, moved along towards her neck. Lost in his moment, his lips followed her collarbone to the base of her neck, and then a mouthful of scarf. Killed the moment. But before Beth could object, he'd moved his hand and started tugging at the scarf, his blood burning through his body and skin electric. Suddenly, his lips were no longer in contact with skin. Confused, he opened his eyes. Her head was not there. Then he hears her voice, Down here, it says. Looking down into her lap, he sees her head staring back up at him. Slight shock there. Would you kindly reattach my head, please? Until I can find some new bolts, I'm relying on that scarf to keep my head in place. His mouth moves, no sound for a little while. But finally, he manages to utter, "Of course." And calmly, as he can, and carefully, he lifts her head and places it back on her shoulders. Beth fumbles with the scarf and then turns to look at him. "Are you okay?" she asks. He's sitting back in the sofa, watching her, his face flushed and sweaty. He's not feeling particularly great. Quite nauseous now. Bit shaky, in fact. "I'm okay," he lies. "I wasn't quite expecting that." Beth gives a very sweet smile. "I was going to tell you eventually," she says. Well, Toby, licking his very dry lips. "Well, if we have secrets, then perhaps I should share mine." She tips her head to the side slightly and raises her eyebrows. He begins to shake and shake. His body rips and his face begins to elongate and teeth enlarge. Beth claps her hands with glee. "Oh, great," she says. "A werewolf. What a great match the monster dating website did. I love a guy who's wild in bed. Come on." And she grabs his hand and drags him off to the bedroom. Thank you.